Nobody sent out a memo. There was no press conference. But somewhere over the last stretch of racing, the NASCAR garage quietly made up its mind about Shane Van Gisbergen. He's not a storyline to them anymore. He's a strategy problem. And that distinction between someone the garage finds interesting and someone the garage actively prepares for is the single most telling indicator in motorsport. More than wins, more than points, because it's the one thing you can't fake and the one thing the broadcast almost never shows you. Right now, there are two conversations happening about SVG. The public one is still asking whether he belongs long term. The private one, the one that lives between crew chiefs and engineers and the drivers who have to line up beside him, stopped asking that a while ago. They moved on to a different question entirely, and the fact that most people don't even know what that question is yet tells you exactly how wide the gap has become. So let's close it. Follow the coverage and you'll hear a familiar framing. Strong result, pleasant surprise, impressive for a newcomer. Let's see if he can sustain it. That's the loop. And it resets almost every week. Each solid run gets treated like it might be the anomaly rather than the pattern. But a crew chief building a fuel strategy doesn't have the luxury of resetting every Monday. Neither does the driver trying to figure out who's going to show up on the outside of turn one with 30 laps left. Those people assess in real times. Practice pace, long-run behavior, how someone manages their equipment across a stint, whether they fix a weakness between sessions or carry it into the race. That evaluation is constant. It's granular, and it has no interest in narratives. What it's produced quietly is a behavioral shift across the garage. Teams are building SVG into strategy calls he wasn't part of a year ago. And the way drivers race him has changed. They used to race around him, manage his presence on track, account for him the way you account for someone who might be fast but isn't yet part of the equation. That's different from racing against someone. Racing against someone means you've accepted fully that they can take something from you. Points, position, clean air, a race you thought was yours. He crossed that line, and most fans haven't clocked it yet. There's a reason it's invisible from the outside. The broadcast captures results. It doesn't capture adjustments. A seventh-place finish looks like a seventh-place finish on the ticker. But if a rival team shifted their pit window because of where SVG was running, if a driver changed their entry into a corner because of what he'd done over the previous stint, that never makes the highlights. It circulates through headsets. It gets discussed in debriefs, it shapes the next week's preparation, and it stays inside the garage. That's where his reputation is moved the furthest, not in the standings, in the room. Every driver in any series carries two reputations. The public one runs on results, broadcast coverage, and whatever the internet decides to argue about on a given week. The internal one runs on something harder to see. How the competition behaves when your name appears on the entry list. Do they adjust? Do they account for you? Do they change what they'd otherwise do because you're in the field? For SVG, the answer to those questions has changed, and the distance between that internal shift and the public conversation is where the real story sits right now. If you're watching from Australia, you've probably felt this already. Something about what you see on track doesn't match the way it gets talked about. You watch him through the field, you see how he handles restarts, you notice how the car moves underneath him when things compress, and then you hear the commentary frame it like it's still an open question and something doesn't line up. It's not bias. You're reading the race more accurately than the coverage is framing it. And this is a rhythm Australian fans know in their bones. When one of ours walks into an American series, the recognition always runs late, not because of disrespect, because the system has its own gravity, its own history, its own hierarchy of who matters and why. You don't crack that open with a single weekend. You do it through relentless, unglamorous accumulation week after week until the weight of evidence becomes impossible to explain away. SVG is deep into that process, deeper than the scoreboard tells you. Now, while the public perception lags behind the garage, something interesting happens. A driver who's more dangerous than the conversation suggests gets to operate in a space with less pressure, less broadcast scrutiny, less strategic attention from teams that haven't caught on yet. For most drivers, that wouldn't matter much, but for someone who came through Supercars, a series that basically forges you under pressure, getting room to work quietly isn't a disadvantage, it's a weapon. The correction is coming, it always does. There'll be a stretch of races where the conversation suddenly lurches forward and everyone talks about it like the writing was on the wall the whole time. That's the pattern. But when it happens, the garage won't be surprised. They worked it out months ago, they already have. So the question that actually matters isn't whether Shane Van Gisbergen can compete at this level. The people who answer that question with their own results, every weekend with their own careers on the line, already answered it. The question is how much longer the gap holds between what the paddock knows and what the rest of the sport is willing to say out loud. If you've been watching closely enough to feel that gap, trust what you're seeing. You weren't early, the conversation was just late. If this is the kind of thing that changes how you watch a race weekend, not the results, but what's shifting underneath them, hit subscribe, because when public perception finally catches the garage, this story moves into a different phase entirely, and you're going to want to be across it when it does.